Am I out of touch? Am I out of my place? When I keep saying that I'm looking for an empty space. Oh, I'm wishing you here.
Hello and welcome to the Hartland Spotlight. I'm Todd Cheney, and the Hartland Spotlight is a weekly show with interviews and highlights of the Hartland School District. Today we are joined by Hartland teacher, Mr. Paul Scheidler. Mr. Scheidler, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to throw a couple questions at you. Obviously, we've known each other for quite some time now. Can you tell us a little bit about, prior to you going into education, what your background was?
Before I got into education, my background was primarily the military. I had joined the Army in 1982, straight out of high school, and after several years on active duty, I started school at Michigan State, and eventually that evolved into going through the College of Education at Eastern Michigan after I got my bachelor's at Michigan State. So,
And then what year did you start teaching here in Hartland?
good question. I did my student teaching here in '91, and I did a lot of part and full-time sub jobs when I wasn't off also at a military school, which I had to go away to a couple months at a time. And then I ended up teaching summer school and night school, and then I taught at Legacy from 1994 to, or 93 to 94. And then I was hired here at the high school the day before the first day of school in the 94-95 school year. Yeah.
So no prep, here you go.
Yeah, actually my classroom was set up at the Legacy School to start my second year there, and they suddenly had a vacancy and said, hey, can you start tomorrow? And I said, yes, I can.
So primarily you teach social studies history courses here at Hartland High School. What are some of the courses you teach now and some of the courses that you've taught in the past?
Well, I went through the standard teaching of world history, and then it became global studies, U.S. history, and then I began teaching the AP U.S. humanities block with first with Mrs. Cooley and then with Mr. Wabel. And I taught AP European history, and now I teach a class called History Seminar, which is for juniors and seniors, and it's an elective class for students that are interested in taking another history class when they're an upperclassman. So.
Got it, so quite a few.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest reasons we have you here today is to congratulate you. Last year you were named the Annette and Jim McConnell High School History Teacher of the Year here in the state of Michigan.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about if you knew about that award coming, or maybe how that came about?
Well, I have been doing this history seminar class, as I say, and a lot of what we do in the history seminar class is primary source history, where you learn about your family, where your family came from, what your family was doing during whatever period we're teaching, the Second World War, the First World War, the American Civil War. And in this particular class, last year, we were teaching, I had chosen the First World War class because it was the centennial. So we're coming up in another week or so on the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the end of the war. So I felt like the First World War class was the right thing to do that year, and we had already done the family histories of all of the kids in the class, and I was at a conference in Detroit, and actually Jim McConnell, the guy who's the award's named after, said to me, I'm really interested in this, follow up and let me know how the rest of it goes. And right after that, we received 2 big bins of material from another teacher in the building, Frank Shinkonis. He knew that I was teaching this class and said, my mother-in-law has all these bins that she just gave to my wife, and they're all about their relative. Are you interested? I said, yes. They brought it in, and there were letters, there were postcards, hundreds of them, and Detroit newspapers from 1918, 1919, 1920. All kinds of odds and ends that all came from this one soldier. So we decided that we would do a project tying all of this information together and developing a historical narrative using primary sources on this one soldier. Ray Hedipole was his name, Sergeant Hedipole. And at the end of it, it got even more interesting because Mr. Shinkonis' wife's family said, can we come in? First it was just his wife, and then it was his mother-in-law, and then at the end there were 14 people from the family all there of all different ages, the children and grandchildren of Ray, and they all wanted to know the story of what Ray did in the First World War. And the students pretty much took over, and they got up and they had the PowerPoint presentation ready to go. They had all the documents printed off, they had the pictures laid out, and the family just went crazy over it. They loved it. We told them a lot about what he did and where he went that the family had no idea. So, and after it ended, they wanted the kids to stick around because they wanted the kids to help them identify the photographs and things, so that was great. But the kids developed all kinds of interesting ways of sorting all the history that I had not thought of. A group of them got on Google Maps and traced all of Ray's postcards all the way across Europe and all the way back to the United States so they could tell where he went all over Europe based on the postcards. And then the letters lined up with those to say where he was and when he was traveling through that area. And then the pictures lined up with those as well. Turned out one of the students actually was a sailor. His ancestor was on a ship that Ray sailed on.
Huh.
So he was a crewman on board the troop ship that carried Ray over. So this young man's great-grandfather very likely bumped into Ray walking down a hallway in the ship. So it turned out very well, and they learned a lot. I learned a lot because, like I said, they were doing lots of crazy things. Like they would take a picture of the picture with their phone. They were using their phones for all kinds of things I hadn't thought of. Then after they took the picture, they could zoom in with their thumbs on the picture and pick out all the details of the uniform. And based on what we learned about what they could wear on their uniform and when they could wear it, they could then place the picture. This is Ray when he's already home from the war. This is Ray when he's overseas. The war is over by now. The war is not over by now. This picture's in France. This picture's in Texas. They were able to pick all that stuff out.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So you've been here for a quarter of a decade, basically, or a quarter of a century, basically, and and I mean, I've been here about the same amount of time too.
Right,
but
right.
what do you think it is about Hartland that makes you want to stay here? Like, is there something that you kind of pick out and say, this is special about Hartland, this is why I'm here?
One of the things I find so interesting about Hartland is that the community centers around the school. And for a long time, that was because there was the little village of Hartland, and then there was the US 23 M59 intersection, but there really wasn't a center point of Hartland itself. And it seemed to me when I got hired here, and all the way, it still feels that way now, that it's really the school. It's the schools that are the center point. They're kind of the focal point of the community. And that's a great center point to have, you know. So Hartland's always been involved. It's a very strong community compared to, I grew up in Howell, and I feel like Hartland's kind of a more tightly knit community than Howell. Sorry, Highlanders, that's the way it is. But I really feel like Hartland just has this sense of, even if you moved here, you kind of feel like everybody knows everybody, and everybody is working towards something better. There's a very positive vibe that comes from Hartland that I can remember even back when I was subbing, trying to get a job. I'd always want to come back to Hartland and get jobs here because the atmosphere was just, it was more safe, secure, friendly, positive than other places I subbed. So, yeah.
Well, great, and we've seen it, at least the high school, double in size.
Yeah.
So since we've started teaching, or since I've been in school, it's more than doubled in size. So,
Yeah.
and it still keeps that small feeling that you almost know everyone, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you. We appreciate having you on.
Absolutely.
That'll do it for the Hartland Spotlight today. Check us again next week when we bring you highlights and interviews from the Hartland School District.